Chris has over 28 years of business continuity, crisis, and emergency management program experience. He's a results-oriented professional who has extensive hands-on experience in managing programs in a variety of industries, including biotech, pharmaceutical, financial, and entertainment. He is currently the immediate past president of the Business and Industry Council for Emergency Planning and Preparedness. Chris previously held positions with Amgen, with Warner Brothers Studios, which you'll hear more about, Gibraltar Savings, and First Interstate Bank Card. Chris has been on the BICEPP Board of Directors for 24 years and also has served on the National Board of Directors of the Association of Contingency Planners, that's ACP, and also on the National Disaster Search Dog Foundation. Please join me and give a warm Rancho Mirage welcome to Chris Wright.
Thanks for having me, and I had the pleasure of having Mary Lou and Dr. Maletti and a couple of others from your group out to our BICEPP annual convention conference that we had in Van Nuys in September of last year. And so part of my negotiation with Dr. Maletti to have him come and speak at our session was, he said, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'll come and speak at yours, but you've got to come to Rancho Mirage in June of 2019 and speak at ours. And so I jumped at the opportunity because I miss speaking to crowds because it's one of my favorite things to do. I have to spend way too much time in meetings and doing other things nowadays in the work that I do. And so when I get the opportunity to come and talk, especially about a topic like we're talking about today, I try to jump at it because it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to move around. I got my Britney Spears, microphone on here, so hopefully it'll stay on. But I know Mary Lou mentioned about waiting kind of to the end for Q&A, but certainly you can write down questions and wait till then. But if you've got a question, I don't really want you to necessarily wait to the end. Ask it. All right, we've got enough time. I'll get through my presentation. I'd rather get your question answered while it's hot on your mind, as opposed to maybe you deciding by the end that, oh well, I don't want to ask the question, because I want to get your questions answered. My goal, and I mentioned it to the councilman when I was introducing him earlier, is that I want you to be able to walk away today with at least one nugget of information that you didn't know when you walked in the room. Okay, if I could do that as a presenter, I think I've accomplished what my objective was, which was to share at least one thing that's of interest to each and every one of you. So if I can do that over the course of the next 55 minutes or so, that I've accomplished what my goal is in regards to getting you information. Part of that is that I know what I want to present, but I've also been blessed with lots of knowledge and experience from, like was mentioned, almost 30 years of experience being in this. And so I probably have an answer to your question, all right? I hope it's a good answer. I'll give you an answer. But if I don't have an answer, one thing I have been fortunate to do is come across a lot of resources that I can point you to, where you can go and find the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'm not confident in my answer, I'll at least hopefully be able to give you an idea of where you might be able to get information. So when Dr. Maletti and I were talking about doing this session, one of the things that he goes, I think that if you talked about your experience at Warner Brothers, that would be really of interest to the crowd. Because I understand Warner Brothers, it's a wonderful organization. I had 5 wonderful years that I spent there, including during the time in '94 when in January when Northridge Earthquake hit. I also have personal experience with the Northridge Earthquake besides my work experience, because I live 1.1 miles away from where Northridge was epicentered. And so Northridge was, at least so far in my life, and I hope it is, my big one, right? And so I'll try to share some of my personal experience in regards to home environment as well, because that's important. So we got most of this through. That's I shouldn't call Lucas this, but that's my reject search dog. One of the things about the National Disaster Search Dog Foundation, which Mary Lou mentioned I had the pleasure of being associated with and the chairman of the board for a number of years, is that the mission of that organization is that they take rescued dogs from a variety of sources, shelters, rescue organizations and such, and they train them to become live scent disaster search dogs. And they pair them with, for the most part, with firefighters across the country to be able to go out and deploy when situations like tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, mudslides, all sorts of different things, train crashes, all sorts of things that they get deployed to. But sometimes during the course of that training, a dog will fall out of the training because of different reasons. Sometimes it's medical. We have Obi, our German Shepherd at home, is a dog that was, and I still think he would have been a tremendous search dog, but he had medical problems. And like any athlete where you're going to invest a lot of money in the training and conditioning of that athlete to go off and do the job, there's a point where you have to say, maybe not worth investing in this one, right? Lucas, which I find hard to believe, apparently lacked toy drive, because the whole idea of this way that they train the search dogs is that they drive them for the reward, which is a toy, okay? So they are trained to go out and find missing humans with their remarkable scent capability, and when they find them, they get rewarded with the toy. So it's all about the toy. So if they're not toy-driven, they probably won't make a good live scent search dog. You go in my backyard right now, I guarantee you Lucas has a toy in his mouth. The dog always has a toy in his mouth. I don't know what it was that they were looking for, but apparently it wasn't enough for Lucas. So one of the other remarkable things about the Search Dog Foundation is that they guarantee when they take dogs from shelters and from rescue groups that the dog will never be put back into a shelter or a rescue group, that they will find what's called a lifetime care home for that dog. We are Lucas and Obi's lifetime care home. And so, and they're a lot of fun. They're a pain every once in a while because they are super high-driven dogs, right? That's one of the reasons why they were good potential dogs for that. But anyways, I always like to show my picture of Lucas. So there's Lukey. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Business and Industry Council for Emergency Planning and Preparedness, BICEPP, as Mary Lou mentioned. That's an organization that was founded in 1983 by then Mayor Tom Bradley in the city of Los Angeles. Mayor Bradley was a very wise man in many ways, and one of the things that he recognized was the fact that the city of Los Angeles had remarkable capabilities with their public agencies to respond to different types of disasters. A Class 1 fire department, very large and capable police department, a medical network of hospitals and emergency medical response that could deal with it. But he also recognized the fact that in a large event, especially something like an earthquake, that the ability for those public agencies to effectively respond and deal with the large number of need that there will be would be limited, right? There's just, and I'm sure the situation exists the same in every community across the U.S., right? In major disasters, there's going to be more need in the initial few hours of that event than there is professional responders. In the case of business preparedness, his concern was, business, you guys need to learn from each other. We'll help, so we'll partner with you in this public-private partnership. So, you hear that all the time nowadays, right? Public-private partnership, right? Well, BICEPP was one of the first, and it was way before anybody called it a public-private partnership, but it was just a good relationship that came together. So the mayor hosted a breakfast. He asked all of the major CEOs of organizations like ARCO and Chevron and some of the studios were involved to come, and he basically said what I just said to you. He said, hey, well, we're going to take care of as many as we can, but if you guys don't get your act together and be better prepared, then the economy of the city is going to be impacted, which therefore will have a longer impact on our ability to recover and get back to normal, all right? So that started BICEPP. Members include all sorts of different organizations from both the public and private partnership organizations. from very small, literally one-person organizations to, up to, and actually beyond 10,000 employees. So it's all over the place. So it's a great organization. I've been associated with, like Mary Lou said, for 24 years. Been the president for, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 of those years, and on different committees and such. And if you want more information, you can go to BICEPP.org and get more information. While it's based out of Los Angeles, we do have members from across the Southern California area. I think we actually have a couple folks from Northern California as well. So let's talk about business preparedness. First of all, how many of you in here are here representing a business in some form or fashion? Okay, that's why you're here today, okay? Good, okay? So here's some staggering statistics. According to the Association of Small Business Development Centers, right, the effects of a disaster on small business can be quite profound. More than 1 in 4 businesses will experience a significant crisis in a given year, okay? How many of you have experienced some type of crisis, whatever definition you call crisis, okay, I'm not gonna get into what you would call a crisis in the last year, some type, okay? So 5, 6 hands. So that's about almost our 1 in 4, right? Of those businesses that experience a disaster and have no emergency plan, 43% never reopen. Okay? Of those that do reopen, only 29% are still operating 2 years later. All right? So yeah, at 43 don't reopen at all, 43%, and then that's bad. Right? What does that do to our economy? Because what realistically, and I've never really worked for a small business in regards to my employment as a emergency disaster planner. I've always worked for major corporations. But the reality is that small businesses are the backbone of our communities, all right? And one of the reasons why I have always supported helping all businesses get prepared is that I can be working for the big company on the corner, a Warner Brothers with however many thousands of employees. But if those employees don't have places to go and eat, and don't have places to go and get their cars taken care of, don't have places to go get their clothes dry cleaned, all the other things that we have in the communities that we live and work in, then what might happen to my employees? They might go work someplace else, right? Because it's not convenient to do. I'm going to go someplace else. And then what does that do? Then that starts bringing down even the big companies. So it's a problem. And I will admit, these are kind of dated numbers. I think when this organization did that research, I'm guessing this is probably at least 10 years old, but I'll guarantee you that the numbers haven't gotten better. In fact, they probably have gotten worse. Because as the economy forces resource constriction, right? So we have less people available to do things like emergency planning in businesses of all sizes, then we end up with less actual planning going on. How many of you in the room, and this is obviously, how many of you in the room think that you need to do something to be prepared for disasters? Well, you probably wouldn't have come out this morning to hear me talk if you didn't think that was the case. So why don't people get prepared? Why don't businesses get prepared? What do you think? Somebody holler out an answer. What do you think? Yeah.
They have a false sense of security.
False sense of security, okay. Yes?
Time and money.
Time and money, yeah. They don't know how. That's a good one. And all of those are good. All of those are good reasons, but how valid are they, really? Right? I mean, a lot of what you do, and we went out to dinner with Mary Lou and one of your commissioners last night, and we were talking about the fact that a lot of things are just behavior modification. And I'll talk about that as we go through the day-to-day, okay? People always use, it takes money to do this, and we don't have enough money. Okay, I understand that. But there's a lot of things you can do that are just behavior modification. Okay? Think about your workplace right now, wherever you sit and work. If an earthquake was to happen when you're back at work, today, tomorrow, whenever you're back there, is there enough space underneath your desk for your entire body to get under? Because the other thing that happens a lot in today's world is that we're cramped for space, right? Why? Well, because square footage costs money. So there's not always enough storage areas. So what ends up happening in many cases is that the space underneath your desk ends up being storage space. And I don't know about you, but it takes a lot of space for this big boy to get underneath the desk. So I can't have boxes underneath there. If I got boxes under there, that's going to be a real problem. Some part of me is going to be exposed to stuff that might be falling. Now, did it take any money to correct that? Well, maybe, depending what the issue is as far as storage goes. But I think most of the time, if you really look around, you could probably find some legitimate storage. Or it might be, what is it that's in the box anyways? What's the old rule, right? If you haven't touched it in 6 months, do you really need it, right? So some of it's just behavior modification. And I'll try to share some of those things with you as well as we go through it, because that's a common deterrent. And BICEPP, many years ago, we undertook an effort to put together, and a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today, in fact, many of my slides are based off of the BICEPP Staying Open for Business After Disasters workshop. It originally had the name A Blueprint for Small Business Survival, after that title that I just told you. But we took that off of it because what we were finding is that businesses were, well, first of all, what's a small business? There's all sorts of definitions of a small business, right? Is a one-person business a small business? By employee numbers, yes. But could that one-person small business be making millions of dollars? So by revenue, it wouldn't be a small business. So it's hard to define that. And the other thing is that after we sat down and looked at it, we really found that the reality is that the type of methodology that I'm going to share with you today, which is what we had in the program when it was called Staying Open for Business After Disaster, A Blueprint for Small Business Survival, was the same exact methodology that I was using at Warner Brothers and at other organizations that I was working at, and that others within BICEPP are working at. You just scale it for what it is that you're dealing with as far as the type of business, the size of business, the type of activity the business is involved in. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about Warner Brothers. I had the pleasure of working at Warner Brothers for 5 years, from 1990 to 1995, so that was over the period of time when the Northridge Earthquake happened. Warner Brothers is a very large facility in Burbank, California, 110 acres, lots of buildings. And one of the interesting things about movie studio and television studio lots is that while there is a certain number of staff that are there on a regular basis because they work for that company, a large amount, in fact, somewhere around like 75% of the people who are on the lot, not just at Warner Brothers, but at any studio lot, on any given day are not full-time employees of that studio. They work for a production company that happens to be shooting on the facility that day. The next day, they're going to be over at Universal. 3 days later, they might be over at Paramount. So one of the challenges in that environment is that it's very hard to teach all the people who are on the property what you want them to do in different types of emergencies, right? Because they don't work for Warner Brothers, right? So it's a challenging environment in many ways. It basically is a small city in the city of Burbank. It has its own fire department. It has its own medical response capability. It is supported by the city of Burbank, a fire department and law enforcement and others, but they have built basically a small city within the city in that capability. This is an aerial shot of what the studio looks like. So this is the studio area. So all this is sound stages. There's some back lot areas, and of course this has all changed. When I was there they actually still had some of the old Western, dirt road back lot stuff because it was kind of towards the end of that. Now that's, from what I understand, been transitioned to different space. But one thing I also want to point out to you is that this right here, that's the Los Angeles River. And we'll talk more about that later on, okay? We talk about risks. So some key program elements that we had in place at Warner Brothers. We had what was called the Warden program, the Wardens of Warner Brothers. If you ever want, you go to YouTube and search for Wardens of Warner Brothers. We were fortunate enough to have some really tremendous management support there, and we did a film to promote the Warden program and individual personal preparedness amongst the staff. And it includes people like Clint Eastwood and all sorts of different other stars. I could name a lot. Bugs Bunny is in it. The Roadrunner and the Coyote are in it. So there's lots of good fun stuff in it. And I would have loved to have showed it to you today, but it's restricted in regards to public viewing. But I did notice a while back that somebody put it up on YouTube, and so if you go to YouTube and watch it, then that's between you and YouTube, I guess. But it was really nice. And the Warden program is basically a emergency response team program, right? You guys have a community emergency response team program here in Rancho Mirage, correct? So it's that program built with the studio specific in mind, all right? So it doesn't deal with some of the things that you might be taught in a community setting, but it is specific, it teaches you the basics of CPR, first aid, those types of things, how to use an AED, fire extinguisher usage, how to be able to do light urban search and rescue. Many of the same things that are in the community program is what that program is about. How to evacuate a building safely, how to account for people, all those types of things. We had department representatives from the departments that were there on a day-to-day basis, so they were representing the interests of their department. We had a very close relationship with the local agencies, and that's important. Even if you're a very small, company, if you haven't invited whoever the local fire department is that would respond to your facility to come over and say hi, right? Come over for lunch, come over for some coffee, whatever it might be. Get to know them. It's good to have a good relationship with people like that, all right? They're good people. Firefighters and police department personnel are among the best people that you'll meet, okay? Good people that do, when the rest of us are running out of the building and there's people that are running into the building, like firefighters, those are good people to know, okay? So develop that relationship. Management support, clearly, has to be important, but I'll talk about, how that doesn't always just come as it's like a blank check, right? It comes in phases. And a high-risk profile, okay? So when I say a high-risk profile, what does that mean? Well, clearly being in Southern California, earthquake was and still is a major risk, right? And while I'm going to use earthquake as a lot of what I'm going to talk about today as far as getting prepared, I don't want you to think that the only thing you need to get prepared for is earthquake, because the thing that's much more likely to happen in your business, two things much more likely to happen: a medical emergency amongst a staff member or a member of the public that's on your property, or a fire, okay? Much more likely to happen than earthquake. But if you're doing things to get prepared for earthquake, you're likely also getting prepared for the lesser things, like a fire, like a medical emergency happening in the space. So earthquake, fire, and of course, Warner Brothers has had their fires over the years. Nothing quite like the Universal City fire that happened, a number of years ago. But the studio facilities have had fires. And then, as I mentioned, the LA River. While I was there 2 times, we had the LA River almost crest and impact the facility. It actually did impact because there was a parking lot right along the edge of where the river is at that did have to have a bunch of studio vehicles moved off of it, otherwise we would have lost them. And so there was some business impact. I mean, we didn't lose any vehicles at the time, but it was a threat. And so one of the things that you need to do, and I'll talk a bit more about this later on, but you need to know what is the risk around you, right? And it's going to be different for every one of you in the room. Now, some of it's going to be uniform, right? Fire, earthquake, everybody in this room, you have that as a threat. You have that as a risk, okay? But what else do you have? What's the business next door to you do? Do they handle lots of hazardous materials, right? If they do, and again, probably doing it appropriately and within code compliance and everything, but when that earthquake happens, is there a higher probability of something maybe going bad in their shop that could impact your shop, because of the fact that's going on. So having some knowledge of that going on is helpful, right? Can you plan for it? Well, what you can plan for is maybe having some understanding of it and knowing that that's one of the first things you may want to check on is how is Charlie doing next door, right? But having that awareness of what the risks are. So why plan? That's one really good reason, right? That's across the United States, the hot zones for potential earthquakes in the U.S. And you'll notice, where are we? I don't think it can get much pinker, right? Anybody, I understand I didn't feel it, but I understand there was a 3.3 in Cabazon last night. Anybody feel it? Oh, a couple, all right, good. Not good, but, you know. It's funny how, I shouldn't say this because then people will want to invite me to come and speak, but very often, the day before or the day after I speak, the area where I've spoke at experiences a small little shaker, which is, you know, coincidental. I don't have any control over that. But then, you know, let's take a closer look at California, and Southern California in particular, and you can see that, you know, again, you know, where are we, right? So, did anybody in the room not know that you had an earthquake risk when you woke up this morning? Okay, you do, right? And, of course, being where you're at here, as close to the San Andreas Fault as you are, you know, the big one, as we have heard for years and years and years, is closer potentially to you than it will be to many others, all right? But I will tell you, while there's certainly, you know, you need to understand that that's part of the risk, it's not the big one that you have to be worried about. It's the smaller one that's closer to you, okay? That's what happened to me in 1994 when the Northridge Earthquake hit. As I mentioned before, 1.1 miles away from the epicenter of the Northridge Earthquake. How big was Northridge? Anybody remember? 6.7 or 6.8. Yeah, it's funny, that's a good answer because it's like, well, it's like you'll hear numbers between 6.4 and 6.8, okay? Somewhere in there. I think officially it was like a 6.5, but, you know. Is that a big quake? It is if you live 1.1 miles away from it. Okay, I can tell you, it's a big quake. Right? Now, fortunately, the house I live in it was built in 1953. Old ranch, you know, stick-built ranch house, single story. Other than some cracked drywall and some content damage, because we moved into the house exactly one month before the Northridge earthquake hit. So all the things that I championed, and you'll hear me talk about today, about getting prepared and locking things down and fastening things and cabinet latches and all those things, I had not put on the cabinets yet because we were still unpacking. And it was going to be too inconvenient as we were doing that, so we hadn't done it. So Mother Nature caught me without my latches. Okay? So we had probably 80% more content loss than we would have later once that work had been done. Brick walls around the property, those were damaged. But for the most part, you know, we came through it pretty well, and that's 1.1 miles away. But it was big. It shook we thought it was a train coming through the side of the house, and we don't live anywhere near a train. Okay, it was big. And you have a lot higher probability of that size quake happening to each and every one of you in this room than you do of the 8.0 or larger big one. Why? Because there's a lot more smaller faults that can produce 6.5s around us than the San Andreas or the San Jacinto fault, in your guys' case, that are the two that could produce 7 or larger size quakes. And so the smaller ones happen more frequently. Okay? So if you get down to just sheer numbers, smaller quake happens more frequently than the big ones, right? So the risk is higher for that. And while it may not affect as much of the region as the big one, it can still be very impactful to you and your business. Okay? So let's not do this. Okay? Let's not stick our head in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen. Please, all right? Don't stick your head in the sand. You You know you have. One of the reasons why you're here today is that you know you have. Okay? Maybe not all of you, but some of you know the reason why you're here today is you just finally, you're going to pull your head up out of the sand and you're going to do something about it, as opposed to being like too many people, which is they ignore it. How can you live here or anywhere in Southern California and not be prepared for earthquake? I don't understand. It's going to happen to the guy next door? Right? You hear that attitude a lot about other things, right? Oh, the fire will happen to there, not here, right? If the earthquake happens to the guy next door, it happened to you too, right? So why? Why do we do that? So let's talk about the planning process. Really important. I'm going to come down off the stage. I need to move. Really important with the planning process. Depending on the size of your organization, involve as many people as possible. Because you're not doing this planning process because you want to have a document on the desktop or on your server or on the shelf. You're doing it because you want to be better prepared. And the more you do to have people understand and work through this process that I'm going to walk you through, which is exactly what the methodology we use at Warner Brothers, the methodology we use at many other companies around the globe, is the same type of approach, all right? Is to be able to consider the risks, plan for them, do the things, and it's not like you're going to do it overnight. That's the other thing I probably should right up front. Make a commitment today, all right? Let's go back to this. Make a commitment today. Maybe you're not going to pull your head out all the way, but you're going to at least once a month, you're going to do something over the next year, right? You're going to do something to not have your head in the sand anymore, right? And that's not hard, right? One time a month, spend a couple of hours doing something to progress your planning, and not only as at the company you represent, but as an individual, okay? Because you need to get prepared at home too. Because if you're not prepared at home and you're at work when the situation happens, what's going to happen? You're going to be that much more worried about what's going on at home, all right? And rightfully so. So let's get prepared at both places. So involve all key individuals in the process. That's important. That way they've experienced it. You never know who's going to be at the property at the time an event happens. All right? And other people have other perspectives than you do. And they may have knowledge, especially within the business. They may have knowledge of other risks that you don't know about. Right? Because, they work in the back room, they work in the mail room, they work wherever it is that they might work within your company, and they know things that are going on there that maybe nobody else knows about, that should be considered possibly within your planning activity. So do consider whatever plan you're working on as a living document, right? I know I come across people all the time that say, oh yeah, well we're starting our project. Our project is to put an emergency plan in place. What's the problem with a project? Projects usually have a beginning and an end, right? Where did I put my coffee? Oh, there it is. Thanks, honey. This is my wife. This is my wife, Barbara. I bring her along so she can tell me where my coffee is. Yeah, Barbara. Yeah. But what's the problem with that? Yeah. We get done with it, we stick it on the shelf, and what happens? It collects dust. And in today's world, especially depending on what type of business you're in, if you're talking about doing business continuity planning for the technology element of what you do, which you need to, because one of the greater risks that we have in today's world, besides the natural disaster risks, is the technological risks we have with cyber and other issues relative to that. So part of your planning should be including, and even if it's for earthquake, is what would you do if you had to set up operations someplace else? And in many cases, that involves, well, how are you going to set up the infrastructure of technology that you need to be able to run your business? All right? And that changes pretty frequently in today's world, doesn't it? I mean, are you doing the same things on the same type of hardware with the same software that you were doing a year ago? No, not very often. Yes, sir. Well, of course, it depends on the organization and how technically savvy, let's just say, somebody needs to be to do certain activities, right? But that's why I say include key individuals, right? So you have to take a look at your organization and say, what does that mean, right? And some of that is going to be, you might even get down to, and I've done this with organizations, say, so where, they come up with a list, they got 100 people in the company, they call 20 of them key to being able to recover business. Where do those people live, all right? Oh, well, Charlie and Sam live, 40 miles away, and somebody else only, they live 20 miles away, these other people, so just physically, where do they live? And then be able to say, okay, well, so because of that, it's much more likely that these 3 or 4 people may not be able to get back to the property as quickly as we would like them to, because if there's road damage or whatever the situation may be, they just aren't going to be able to get back as soon. So maybe we need to find additional backups for whatever it is that those people are key to doing, all right? It can be as simple as that, to say, okay, well, here's where we feel is a higher risk of a need of certain expertise, and then be able to build upon that with moving people into the right spot. Does that help? I mean, it's...
No, it was more, my question was more like, let's use Warner Brothers as an example.
Okay.
How many key people do you have, and how do you update them? Because what if your key people leave to go work someplace else? I've just seen that problem occur where the person that develops a plan does a great job. It's a book, some guy.
Yeah.
The person leaves, it gets shuffled into another box someplace. The new person comes in and doesn't quite know. So I don't know how many companies truly have the resources to do that kind of training and handoff. But
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, again, a lot of that is just having somebody, somebody needs to own the planning process, right? So that they are watching for those types of things. And depending on the type of, there are all sorts of planning software tools out there to do some of this. And so you can, depending on, some of the larger companies will have that. For instance, some of the ones I've worked for, the owner of the program would actually get notice when somebody leaves the company, so they know, hey, somebody that was in a role within the plan has left, and so now we need to identify somebody to fill in that person on whatever it was that they were doing, so you can get that sophisticated. So I would say maybe having some way of being able to have whoever's in charge of the plan at least know people who have left the company, so they can go, oh, that name sounds familiar. Look through the plan and say, oh, yeah, they were responsible for first aid on the 3rd floor, something like that. All right. So first we're going to talk about hazard assessment. So we talked a little about this already, but just look for safety threats and conditions that jeopardize your activity. That's going to really depend on what type of business you're in, right? If you're, the dry cleaner on the corner, right? What risks you have within your space compared to the donut shop in the strip mall, it's going to be different, right? Or the 100-person administrative service company that's in a 3 or 4 story building. What are the different types of risks and hazards that you need to consider? Do you have a lot of large pieces of equipment, unique specialized pieces of equipment that are not something you can just run down the street or have delivered in a couple of days, all right? Because if so, you have stuff that's unique and maybe longer lead time to be able to get a hold of, you may want to consider how you're going to lessen the risk of losing those pieces of equipment from the different risks that may exist within your organization. All sorts of different things when we talk about risk analysis, right? We talked already about earthquakes and things like that, but what's the combination of the most likely things to happen and the severity of the consequences? Okay, is there a difference between a difference of the likelihood of it happening with a plane crash and a fire? Yes, right? Fire is much more likely to happen than a plane crash into your business or your residence. So you're kind of using that type of thing. What's the definition of a hazard? Well, a threat to safety of employees or customers, right? A threat to inventory and property, and it's likely to disrupt business operations. Okay. Because when we're talking about preparedness, there's 2 things we want to be prepared for. Protecting life safety for your employees and for customers or others that are on your property, and things that can disrupt business. All right? if we disrupt business, we have people available to respond. What's the ability to be able to respond and deal with that? So what's the likelihood of that? How do we identify? So let's talk about structural. And I'm going to kind of use earthquake, obviously, as the key element, as I talked about before, as we're walking through this. So how many of you is your business in a property that the business owns the building and the property it's on top of? Okay, that's actually a higher percentage than normal in a group of this size. So in that case, you have more ability to be able to do things like retrofit and structurally upgrade and do things like that if you're in a building that you own, right? I'm assuming that the rest of you are lessees, right? You're renting the space that you occupy. Somebody else owns it. Probably a property manager runs it for whoever the owner is. And you have limited ability to influence change in the structural stability of the space that you're occupying, okay? So this is where you have to individualize based on your situation what you would do. If you're in a structure that you own and you haven't had some type of a structural analysis done on it, you might want to do that so you have an idea of what could possibly be done to make it stronger in regards to earthquake resistance. Okay? In some cases, that can be very expensive in regards to what those retrofits might be. But again, maybe you come up with a 5-year plan of phasing in the activity. If you're in a building that you don't have the ability to be able to influence those types of things, then you just need to have a recognition of what the risk is. Okay? Maybe at some point, depending on what influence you may be able to have when you get into contract renewal with whoever your landlord is, you may be able to have some conversation around that just to see what their willingness might be able to be if you sign a new whatever length contract to stay in that space, what maybe they're willing to do in regards to increasing the viability of that building. But a lot of what I want to talk to you about is non-structural. So look around this room. In this room, what is a non-structural element that could be of danger to occupants or the ability of the library to continue to utilize this room as the business element that it provides to the library if there was an earthquake? What's a non-structural element that exists in this room? Anybody know? Oh, there goes the lights. That wasn't planned. That's all right. That was funny. No, what do you think? Yeah, well, the lights, right? So the lights themselves, right? So all of this stuff up here, right? All of this is non-structural. That projector's non-structural. Those lights on that channel are non-structural, all right? The window coverings are non-structural. That screen is non-structural. Those pictures on the wall are non-structural. That podium's non-structural. The table and chairs you're sitting at are non-structural. So if the world was to shake and those things have not been installed properly to current codes, it's possible that they could fall. And first of all, what do we not want to have happen? We don't want people to get hurt, right? And also, if they fall and they break, well, if that projector falls and breaks, that's probably a pretty expensive piece of equipment, right? And would it impact the ability of the library to continue to use this room as it normally uses it? Yeah, it would, because they don't have a projector until they replace it. So there's things that can be done to address that, okay? And in some cases, we want to take a look at things that are non-structural, like how things are being stored, like hazardous materials. Because if hazardous materials are stored in cabinets and things that aren't secured in a way that if an earthquake happens, they would fall over, then you end up with, what you're storing is probably stored in appropriate containers and everything when it's stored properly and it's upright. But when it falls over, all that stuff mixes together and makes ethyl methyl rip your lips off, that might be a bad thing. All right? So, let me tell you about my story at Warner Brothers. How am I doing on time? Good, okay. 1993, I started a project there where we had championed doing non-structural mitigation across the studio facility. And at the time, I got what was really good support, but it wasn't mandatory. So what I was given an amount of money that I could go around with, and I had contracted with a company to provide the services to do the actual fastening of things. And we would go out and we would walk through the buildings, and I would talk to the head of the office, the head of the department, whatever it was that was in the building, and I'd say, hey, I'm Chris from the Office of Emergency Services, and we'd love to come in and do a survey of your space, and then come back in a couple weeks, and I'll have this company that's working for us come through and fasten everything down so that if an earthquake happens, it won't fall down and damage any of you physically. And then you'll also be able to get back into business much sooner because your stuff hasn't fallen on the ground and broken. In some cases, people welcomed me with open arms. Oh, great, that's great. And in other cases, it was like, what? They're giving you money to do that, and they won't let me buy a new XYZ, whatever machine that that they wanted, whatever, right? And so I said, I'm sorry, you don't shoot the messenger, right? Well, then January 1994 came around. On the afternoon of January 17, 1994, my program became mandatory. After we walked the studio property with the head of studio facilities, and we saw in the same building, in more than one situation, in the same building, this area on the second floor, that small stuff had fallen off of the desks, right? Because you're not going to fasten this down. I mean, small stuff had fallen off, but the big stuff was all in place. Bookcases, file cabinets, computers, large pieces of production equipment, other things were in place. The guy next door, who had laughed in my face, shall we say, thousands of dollars of loss of stuff all over the place on the ground. And he couldn't say, oh, well, it shook differently over here than it did on the other side of the wall in that other space where everything's still in place. So it was a dramatic example of how doing these types of things can prove to be very valuable. And so it did become mandatory after that. This is some example. This is not from Warner Brothers. I want to make that very clear. This is not damage that was from Warner Brothers. This is just pictures, but this is examples of what it can look like after an earthquake. And everything you're seeing there is non-structural, okay? That's what I was just talking about, right? Stuff all falling. This is, and these aren't, I assure you, these are not staged photos. These are photos from actual earthquake damage that's occurred in space. Stuff's falling over. What if you were sitting right here, right? Not a good situation. The nice thing compared to 1993, 1994, when I was having to do with this, is that there's all sorts of really cool stuff now that's marketed to be able to do the fastening. Specialized types of anchors. This is like for in a data center where this is I forget what it's called, but it's basically like a shake table, right? So the piece of equipment doesn't move. It's on like rollers while the ground's moving, right? So this stuff that's very technically, important, right? And you wouldn't want it to fall over, and it may even be shake sensitive that it could put it out of calibration, that it'll stay in place. Tank holders, so the tank that would be in there doesn't fall over. All sorts of different really cool things that are available now because there's a market for it. Well, there was a market for it back in 1993, but a lot of the lessons hadn't been learned, and so it's really nice. So let's keep talking about how we're going to do the plan. So marketing, preparedness to management. So how do you market it? Because we talked about, somebody mentioned, well, we can't get support, right? It's hard to get support to do these things because there's so much else to have people do. So what do? Well, to some level, I certainly believe there is a moral responsibility of an owner of a company to do things to protect their employees and customers on their property. There are OSHA laws and regulations that require you to do certain things based on the risk profile of your business. The problem with some of those is that they're written very vaguely, and so depending on the person who is possibly enforcing them at your workplace, they can, there's lots of gray area, right? But ultimately, if you live in earthquake country, or if you have certain types of operations in your facility that are higher risk, you should be doing something to be getting prepared. It does reduce legal exposure because there has been many cases now across the United States where companies have been held liable for not doing what would be considered the normal expected practice. Expected practice, not best practice. You don't have to build, the top level program, but you can't just ignore it either. Because if something happens, and certainly in California where we know that there's lots of lawyers, right? The probability of you ending up in court having to justify why you did or didn't do certain activities is likely. And so something to consider. And it saves lots of money. It does. I never actually got a dollar figure of how much money was saved with that faceting that was done at Warner Brothers. But I've seen other numbers that have come out from different analysis. Where, let's say, for every dollar spent on mitigative activities, you'll save $10 in an actual event. Okay, and those are based off of hard studies that have been done with similar types of situations happening in tornadoes and earthquakes and hurricanes and fires and other situations. So that's pretty good. The problem is that people don't think it's going to happen to them, right? Oh, well, it hasn't happened to us yet, so we'll roll the dice and we'll take a chance on another year of it not happening. Why spend $1 if I don't have to spend $1? Yeah, maybe I'll save 10, but maybe I'll not do it for 10 years and I'll save the same $10. And there are people out there who that's their attitude. So let's talk about your toolkit for developing your disaster plan. So set achievable goals. I mentioned before, right? One thing a month. That's all I'm asking you. One thing a month. Okay. Can you do that? Is one thing a month hard to do? There's lots of things that all of us should probably do. One thing a month that would change our lives in many, many ways. 12 things a year. You'd be that much closer to being prepared than you are when you walked in the door today. So think about that. Set achievable goals. I hope I get you all fired up today, right? And to some level, you're gonna be motivated to go out and do something. But I don't want you to go out and then get, like 2 weeks from now, you know what, I haven't done anything. And that, in some cases, it's negative psychologically because then it puts you down and then you just kind of, you put it back in the back pocket and you avoid it again. All right? I'm not going to follow up with you and find out if you did anything. Just make a commitment to yourself and to the organization that you work for to do one thing a month, okay? Sample checklist. And Mary Lou's going to talk about some of the materials you're getting today on the thumb drive. I've seen, she sent me the list of the materials. I think it's a great set of materials. There's all sorts of things out there. Of course, the internet is a wonderful tool if it's used properly. There's lots of things out there. I think they've come up with a nice set of items for you to consider. I'm going to throw a few things up on the screen before I finish of some things that you might take a look at. In fact, I think one of them is the same as one of the items that they have on the thumb drive for you already. But use checklists. Checklists are easy. This doesn't need to be a complicated thing, right? You don't need, in many cases, you don't need to have somebody who has gigantic knowledge of emergency planning to be able to do this effectively, okay? You just need a group of people dedicated to doing what needs to be done and accomplishing one thing a month. And using a checklist, that's very simple, okay? What would you do if you had an unoccupied facility? So the earthquake happens overnight. Let me set the stage to explain this. So earthquake happens overnight, and there's nobody at your company because your company is a 8 to 5 shop, okay? But you need to have a plan for somebody going in and checking on the facility, right? Now, in some cases, that can be challenging, and this is where you want to have knowledge of how you're going to do this before the event. Because If the earthquake happened at 10 o'clock at night, and you had an employee designated or a set of employees designated to go to the property and to check on what's happened there, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, are they going to be able to get in? Because depending on the security and other things at your facility, it may not be possible because their access badge may not work until 7 o'clock the next morning. The security guard may not know that they're authorized to go into your space because you haven't pre-identified that as an activity to have somebody know, oh yeah, well here's the 8 people, to the comment of the gentleman before, here's the 8 people that we're authorizing on behalf of the company to have access to our facility 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, if necessary. So you can go in and take a look at what happened inside of your building, okay? Do you have the phone number of the person who has the keys that can get in 24 hours a day? Because the company, the landlord may not want to give keys to everybody, but there's somebody that has a way of getting in there. So think about those simple things. Does that cost money? Right? Remember, we're talking about money. Does that cost money? No, it just takes, oh, yeah. We'd like to go and look and see how badly our portion of the building's damaged. How do we do that? Put a plan together. You might have a responsibility, especially if you're the only tenant in the building. You want to take a look at your rental agreement or your lease agreement and see, is there a responsibility that if a certain level of damage has occurred or potentially occurred on your property, that you're responsible for notifying the owner? Because in many cases, there is an expectation. Because they don't have a property management company or whatever. It's they lease the space out to you. You're responsible for it. But this quite often gets overlooked. People are like, oh, we're just worried about making sure they're okay. It's like, well, but did you notify the landlord? Did you tell them what's going on? Because they may be also responsible for certain things within the contract, like cleanup. Right? They're responsible for covering the cost of having the company come out and suck up all the water that happened when the fire happened and the sprinkler went off and put the fire out. Simple things like that, okay? Documentation of the damage. Who's going to do that? Insurance companies, in some cases, can be challenging to work with when it's time to put in a claim. So if you don't already know what the claim process is, ask that before you have to do it. Because in the middle of everything else that's going on, to have to suddenly be learning what your insurance company expects in regards to documentation of damage, that's not the time to learn it, okay? Because you won't be as prepared. Because you might not, you go, oh, well, if we're going to have to do that, maybe we'll do things like keep an extra copy of those critical things off the property. Maybe we'll be prepared with a camera or a video camera or something. And people say, oh, well, I always have one on me. Well, mine's over there, but right, I always have a camera or a video camera on me nowadays. Okay, that's good. Who's going to be the keeper of that? What's the chain of command of those types of documents going to be so that they'll be looked upon positively by your insurance company when you get to claim time? What are you covered for? Is it even worth doing that? Because you might be thinking, oh, we're going to document everything. And then you give it to them and they go, oh, you're not covered for earthquake. So whatever time you spent doing all that documentation was for nothing because you don't, right? So find that information out. Talk to the right people within your company. Who knows the answers to the insurance coverage question? That's somebody who should be on your team. Or somebody from your team should go and talk to that person in finance or insurance or whatever it is. Who knows that information? Cleanup, who's going to do that? Do you have an agreement with a company to come and do that? Are you just going to have staff do that? Is it safe for staff to do that? Because what is it that you're likely going to be cleaning up? If you're talking about papers and stuff just strewn all over the floor, that's one thing. If you're talking about potentially hazardous materials, that's a completely other thing about who's going to clean that up. There are companies that you can contract with to provide those services to you post-event. Some of those companies will even take more of your money to put you on a higher level of priority. Because the challenge we have with earthquake is that when an earthquake happens, a whole bunch of companies are impacted. And so the demand for certain types of services, like cleanup services, goes way up because everybody needs it. So if you think you're going to call, XYZ building maintenance and have them come out and clean up your stuff before stuff gets really damaged from the water on the ground or whatever, and you didn't establish that relationship before the event, you might be sadly surprised at their lack of willingness to provide you services or their willingness to take a whole lot more money from you to make you a priority customer. It's just the nature of what happens in these situations. Yeah. So recovery planning. So let's talk a little bit about getting back into business. So first of all, where's your employee going to? Let's talk about some basic stuff. So you evacuate out of the building from a fire, earthquake, whatever might happen. Where are you going to? Do you have that established already? Do all your employees know where to go? If they don't, they need to. Because how are you going to know everybody's okay if you can't somehow account for everybody? You need to be prepared for aftershocks if we're talking about earthquake, right? Keep that in mind when you start talking about doing your cleanup activities and other things too. Don't put people in danger to try to clean up sooner than you really should, okay? So listen to the news. Be paying attention to what the authorities are saying in regards to situations that are going on in your area, likelihood of aftershock, and those types of things. Clean up and document damage, we talked about that. Status of utilities. Do you have the phone number, website details, and other things for all of the infrastructure providers to your business? Who provides you water service? Who provides you electrical? Who provides you all the different things that we use? Internet connectivity. How many of you could your business operate without internet connectivity? It's the nature of the world nowadays, right? Can't. So what are you going to do? Oh, well, we'll work from home. You think the internet connectivity in my house is going to be any better than at the maybe, probably not. Most, not all, but most public internet service providers don't spend a lot of money on redundancy within their system to ensure you be able to watch Netflix tonight if there was an earthquake. Okay? It's just not in their business model. They're not, if you don't have internet at home, it's not, they might, if you call them up, they might give you credit for a couple days or whatever, but they don't build in a gigantic amount of redundancy in their system to ensure that that's going on. And how does the internet run to get into your home or your business? It's based off a whole lot of stuff that has to have power, right? And what's one of the first things that's probably going to go down? Some of it intentionally, right? They shut down power intentionally so that equipment doesn't get damaged. But sometimes equipment gets damaged, and so the ability to be able to have things get powered up is impacted. So what types of vital documents, computer software, databases, like that, how are you backing those things up? What's the catchword nowadays? How do we back everything up today? It's in the cloud. You know it's not really in a cloud, right? You know that it still sits on a piece of hardware somewhere in the world. Now, the way that hardware is, that infrastructure is designed is, supposed to be multiple locations. So if this location goes down for whatever reason, it's already over here, all right? But you might want to ask somebody about how your stuff is really stored in the cloud. Because I've heard stories of where companies have represented stuff being in the cloud and it's really just in the basement of a building in San Bernardino. Okay? And that's it. It's in hardware in a basement in San Bernardino. And that's it. That's the cloud. That might not be as redundant as you think you're getting in that contract. Out of area phone numbers. Who do you need to talk to? I know I always get upset at my beautiful wife here because she spends a lot of time texting people, talk to people. Whatever happened to talking to people, right? But do you actually have phone numbers for people? But talking about text, I'll give her credit. Talking about text, if you don't have the cell phone numbers of critical folks that you need to get in touch with, make sure you have them. Because you know the easiest way to get a hold of people following an earthquake? Is it going to be a phone call or a text message? Text message. Yeah. I don't know all the technology behind it, but from what I understand, in order to send one phone call across the cellular network, the same amount of bandwidth is needed that can send like 8,000 text messages. And it runs on a different part of the cellular network so that it actually is much easier. And I've had this experience. A company I worked for in the past, I had people that were in the big earthquake in Japan that happened a few years back when they had the big tsunami. And they were at the airport, and the only way that we were able to check on them and verify that they were okay was via text messaging. The cell network wasn't working for phone calls, but via text messaging, we were able to verify they were okay. So have that, not only in your business plan, but have that within your plan for your family as well. Don't automatically get on the phone. I know ideally you want to talk to them. You'd love to talk to them and know that they're doing okay, right? But a text message from your loved ones hopefully will be just as reassuring to you that you'll be okay. Yes. That's another, yeah, it still works because certainly the area where the impact has happened is going to be more impacted, including the phone network and things like that. So if you can make a call, either on a cell phone or on a landline, to somebody in Arizona, you're much more likely to be able to call somebody in Arizona than you will be able to call somebody in Desert Hot Springs, okay? Just because of the way that the system works. You can call out of state easier than that. And what we used to always say, choose that, that the retired aunt who watches, soap operas all day long and is most likely going to be there as your family receptionist, right? And have everybody call her because I'd like to talk to my wife directly, but if I hear from Aunt Sally that Barbara called and said she was okay, that's the next best thing to talking to Barbara, right? So, all right. Where are you going to get information? Have some resources. Know where you're going to get the information that you need, okay? Pre-identify that. You don't want to be doing your Google search amongst the rubble, okay? Have these things pre-identified. Have them listed in your plan. Have them loaded on your phone. And then what are you going to do to prevent additional injuries and damage and aftershocks? So keep that in mind again. If we're operating in and around already damaged facilities, in the first few hours and days after a quake, it's very likely that you're going to end up possibly exposing people to further injury unless you're preparing them for it, right? Safety equipment, goggles, hard hats, safety glasses, gloves, proper type of equipment. Did you have a question?
I do. In terms of where to get info,
Mm-hmm.
in a couple places in the documents that are going to be strike for us, the NOAA, whether you...
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, I believe was what NOAA stands for. Yeah, so that's a really good source for weather-related information. So, what's that?
As well as information on disasters.
They have information on disasters there too, yeah.
Question to you is this. In the Los Angeles area where I was working with seniors on disaster preparedness, we learned about Nixle, we learned about FEMA Mobile, and then, of course, LA Alert. Lots of different alert systems.
Right.
Which ones do you recommend? Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, it's a lot for people to learn about these.
Notification systems? Yeah, so what you want to do the question was around notification systems and different, and I don't know, does Rancho Mirage have in many cases they're called reverse 911 systems or alert systems where you can sign up and the city will send out notifications to people to let them know what's going on? I should have researched that and I didn't. I don't know, yeah, you might want to look, like maybe Google Rancho Mirage notification system, emergency notification system. That's what they're usually known as emergency notification systems. Lots of other communities in Southern California, well, really across the country, are putting those in place where they can send out, they can push messages out, but you have to sign up, right? You have to sign up for it because they don't have your cell phone numbers and things like that unless you sign up, and they can't send you things unless you've authorized that to be sent out. But those are good. Right, that LA alert is that. There's also the new earthquake early warning system, which there's actually an app that you can download now. That's in Southern California. It's mainly pushed out of the mayor's office in LA, but it does cover out in this area where you can sign up and get alerted on that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. All right, so let's jump through some of these. So some of the things just to be thinking about, right? What are you going to do as far as replacement of vital equipment? I talked about that earlier. Repair of the building. Keep in mind that you do need to, of course, be working with the local authorities. You can't just, well, I want to get back in business, so I'm going to do what I want to do, because you might be up and running for a week, and then the city inspector comes by and says, "What in the world went on here?" Right? So make sure that you're operating within compliance with that. All these different things in regards to temporary or permanent relocation that you might have to do. Because what if your building is damaged so severely that you have to move someplace else while it gets rebuilt, or while you find some permanent space? So we talked about telecommuting as an alternative. It's possible, but again, you have to establish what types of connectivity and things do you need in order to do the activities that you do. And that obviously gets to the productivity of employee piece, right? If you suddenly, and I've seen this actually happen in real events where people go, "Oh, well, we'll just send everybody home." I say, "Okay, well, let's do that as a drill. Let's send 20% of your staff home and have them do what it is you think they're going to do from home for a day." And then you see the throughput go, whoo, right? Because people aren't used to doing it. There's a lot of distractions at home. The internet speed at home is considerably lower than what they have in your high-tech environment at work. So even though they're sitting at their computer trying to do what they normally do at the office, they just simply can't do it as quickly as they could. And some of those realities can come through. So again, that's why testing some of these things is really important as well. And there might be other issues around property tax reassessment and things like that you can get into. I talked about this, working with your local jurisdiction. I mean, the fact that you're involved with being here today and working with the Rancho Mirage BERT program is good. There's all sorts of different things that cities and agencies do to share resources and bring supplies in. The Red Cross, Salvation Army, all these different agencies, relief agencies that will come in and help move things around. But keep in mind, a lot of those things, we talk about those types of services from Red Cross, that really is more to do with the citizenry, not with business, okay? So the Red Cross is going to show up at your office and give you a bunch of stuff to help you get back into business. They might show up in the community and help or they will show up in the community and help the citizenry, the public individuals get back up and going at home, but you're really responsible for what you're doing there at your work. So different types of insurance, we talked a little bit about this, and then there's different types of agencies, but one thing I really encourage you not to do is don't have your disaster plan be based off of insurance coverage and reliance on public assistance, okay? Because you will find that is often not going to get you back into business. You might get some money. Will you get it in a timely fashion where you can actually use it to get back into business soon enough that you won't go out of business? Depends, right? In many cases, I've heard horror stories about what companies have gone through to get money from not only their insurance companies, but also from, these agencies. So keep that in mind. So employee training, really important things we want to be doing, and I encourage you, if you don't already have some type of employee training, to get people trained in how to use a fire extinguisher, how to do CPR first aid, how to use an AED, do that. You can get that through all sorts of different sources within your community. Maybe you want to do something like an emergency response team, so get people involved in the community emergency response team training activities that go on in the community. And oh, by the way, if they're at work when something happens, they've got that training, they might be able to do something more than they can do now because you incentivize them in some form or fashion to go and get that training. Helps them be able to do all sorts of different things. And it's true. In every catastrophic situation today, it's been civilians who do the majority of life saving. Okay? It's not the professionals. It's nothing against the professionals. It's just back to my comment about earlier about why Mayor Bradley put BICEPP in place. It's just a sheer number of who is where the situation is, right? It's much more likely that you as a trained responder, in this case, you know, a layperson responder, will be able to do something to save somebody's life than coincidentally a paramedic or a firefighter is going to be there to be able to do it. It's just not that likely. Pre-event planning, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. We talked about most of these drills. So do your evacuation drills, drop, cover, and hold. Everybody knows what that is, right? Sometimes I would make you do that, but I'm going to be nice and not have us do it today. But again, it gets back to what that space is. So that might be the one thing that you go back and do for this month is go make sure that you've got space for you to get underneath your desk, okay? Family preparedness, anything you can do as a business to help people, encourage people to get prepared at home will reflect positively on the business, not only day to day, but also in time of an actual event. Because if people are getting prepared at home, what are they doing? If they have a preparedness mindset at home, when they come into your business, what are they going to have? A preparedness mindset. And they're going to recognize that little thing around the office that could be easily corrected, probably at no cost, to create a safer environment because they did the same thing at home. When you have a preparedness, safety-minded culture within your organization, you will be better off when an actual event occurs, definitely. Different types of emergency supplies and equipment. I didn't talk much about emergency supplies today because most of that stuff is stuff that you guys already know, you know. Used to be 72 hours of food and water that was suggested. Now we're up to a week. Okay, be considering that. Oh, and you see cash up there, right? Well, the reason why cash is on there is that what do ATMs require? Power. What does the card chip reader for your debit card or your credit card need when you go to the store to buy something? Power, connectivity, to make sure you actually are a viable individual with money on the back end of that chip. What happens in earthquakes? Power and connectivity go down. So we will become, for a period of time, a cash and carry environment. You want to go buy something at Home Depot, you want to go buy something at the grocery store, if they're open, they're probably not going to be able to take something other than cash. So keep some amount of cash around to be able to do those things. So kind of in closing, it's not the plan, it's the process. I've talked about that a lot, right? Have I talked much about a document? No, I've talked about the process of planning. Now, some of that you're going to document. Some of it you're going to put down on paper. You're going to use a checklist. But a lot of it is just going through the process. And the more people at your company that you have go on that ride with you, the more you have that culture within the company, because more people will be aware of stuff. And you'll be able to manage when the event happens. So I mentioned I was going to bring up a couple of things. This is a wonderful book. You'll notice BICEPP's logo is on there, probably a little bit fuzzy on this screen, but this was put together by a group of us that came together a number of years ago. It's called The 7 Steps to a Disaster Resilient Workplace. You can find it there. It's really nicely put together. It's got, 7 steps laid out. And again, 1 a month, 7 months, there you are. Okay? So that's a good one. I think that's on your thumb drive. The other one, this is more for personal preparedness, is putting down roots in earthquake country. I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Lucy Jones. I've had the pleasure of knowing Lucy for a number of years and working on a number of projects with her, including putting this booklet together a number of years ago. It's been revised. The nice thing about this booklet is that it's available in a wide variety of languages. So depending on the makeup of your workforce, something like providing this is a good way of being able to help people, encourage people to do something in regards to personal preparedness at home. And the fact that it's in multiple languages helps cover a larger portion of our population. But it's really neat, and again, a number of different steps, pointing out things within the home that you might want to consider in regards to hazards that could be impactful. So you can look that one up. So that's what I've got for you. But thank you very much. Good luck to you.